is on estate records. This is a massive subject, and estate records are the records created by those who manage the estates. Now, they cover, the size of an estate can be huge. It can be something like 100,000 acres. It can be much smaller, 1,000 acres. So PRONI, amongst its holdings, we have a substantial set of records relating to what are commonly called the big houses, which are your Lords Abercorn, your Lords Londonderry, Marquis of Downshire, Dufferin and Ava, but we also have ones of the common, of the lower down, the gentry as well, the tenant farmer as well. The estate system pretty much dominated in Ireland from 17th century to the late 19th century, and really came into its own with the Ulster plantation and the upheaval that generated, which brought a whole wave of English and Scottish settlers. As you know, the plantation applied more to the western counties when the throne seized the lands of the former former Earls of Tyrone and Tyrconnell, who fled during the flight of the Earls. However, settlement was not just confined to the western counties. We had Scottish settlers come in on the east, in Antrim and down as well, and into Monaghan as well. The other key feature is that it was the arrival of the plantation scheme brought about basically something new as well, and that is recorded history. We actually now have from that point on we have the records of the estates, and that's very crucial. These estates, they all have to be managed. An estate manager and an estate agent and estate office are crucial, especially if landlords were largely absent, which quite often they were. For the grants from the Crown, a new Ulster economy was created. They're encouraged to build villages, towns, give rights to hold markets and fairs, and the big house became the domain. They were also tasked with creating manor courts to settle petty crime, estate disputes, and more often than not, the land outside of the domain got rented out. We're talking about the landscape being dominated, and this you can see throughout estate records because it reflects every aspect of society, be it transport, schools, churches, industry. Okay, let's have a look at the strengths. I went the wrong way. Okay, let's have a look at some of the strengths of estate records. One of the fortunate things, unlike a lot of other archives in Ireland, estate records generally have survived, and they have survived in very large quantities, and most have been safely acquired and preserved by PRONI. For anybody doing family and local history prior to 1830, they are essential. As you know, anybody who's been to the church records ones, unless it's Church of Ireland, you've no chance of getting church records back in the 17th century. And even the Church of Ireland, it's very limited. Education records don't really go back beyond the 19th century. Ditto with boarding guardian records. So estate records really come into their own for both 17th and 18th century. They also, even after 1830, serve as a surrogate census as well, especially when you've got whole runs of rentals, which recorded the tenants. Very good source, certainly for the rural areas. They do have some weaknesses. They only provide details for heads of families, so women don't appear. Solely will be the male, and it'll be the father. Now, quite often, if it's a series of rentals, the son will appear in successive rentals, but not necessarily the original one. There is also a big habit of tenants and this was referred to in Bill's talk last week, of subletting, and that often does not get picked up in rentals, though we do have other sources such as the valuation records, which we looked at last week, whereby you can follow who's sublet to who else. So what sort of types of estates are there? We have the big estate, that's the Lords Abercorn, Lords Donegal, Dufferin, Downshire, etc. You also have the smaller estates, the gentry estates. For the county of Derry, Londonderry, was handed over to the 12 giant guilds from London to run and to settle, and that reflects a slightly different type of record appearing in Derry. Solicitors will have been involved in most of the transactions, so they will also have copies of a lot of material that you would expect to find in a big estate. So if it's missing in the big estate, it may turn up in a solicitor's collection. And finally, land registry, which I'll touch on at the end of my talk. So key people, landlords, lots of them. In 1800, it was estimated about a third of them are absent. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because some of the best managed estates actually were run by absentee landlords, like the Duke of Devonshire, down in the south of Ireland, impeccably run, and some of the actual lords that stayed on their estates were actually less popular than the absentee ones. The estates were run by an agent who controlled the estate office. They then sub that out to the tenants, and finally the very big importance, and comes up again in most of the big estates, is the big estates needed surveyed. So we have maps, and we have keys to maps. We'll see some examples of that coming up later. That's a list of prominent estate collections across the 9 counties of Ulster, but I'll break it down into a few more. So for County Antrim, North Antrim, it's the Earls of Antrim. They were the dominant family. More into Mid Antrim, we've got Foster, Mazarine, and for anybody who's interested in these areas, they're the relevant reference numbers. Going into County Armagh, Lord Lurgan was a dominant landlord in Lurgan. That's the Brownlow family. Gosfords and Market Hill. County Down was littered with some giant names amongst aristocracy. The Marquess of Downshire in Hillsborough, the Marquess of Dufferin in Ava, in Clandyboy, Lords Gilmorey and Lords Almsley down in the Needhams, down in Newcastle and Newry direction, and then the giant estate of Mount Stewart in Newtonards, the Londonderry collection. Fermanagh, Lords Belmore, Enniskillen and Erne, 3 giant collections covering a lot of Fermanagh. PRONI's got them all. Derry is slightly different. As I said, it was settled by the 12 London guilds. Now, PRONI has 2 of those collections relating to those guilds. That's the Salters and the Drapers. But the other 10 remain in the London Society, which is based in London itself and looked after by the London Metropolitan Archives, and that includes the mercers, the grocers, the fishmongers, the goldsmiths, the skinners, the merchants, the haberdashers, ironmongers, vintners, cloth workers. And finally, for County Tyrone, Duke of Abercorn, Northern Ulster's only Duke, D623, one of our biggest collections, Caledon, and Ranfurly, and the Ranfurly family in Gangman. So that's just to highlight some of the big estates. Now, the Ulster Plantation, as I said, covered Ulster. So we don't just have the big estate records for Northern Ireland, but we extend right into the counties of Donegal, Monaghan and Cavan, which you may or may not have expected. This is an example for Monaghan. These are the 10 biggest landowners in Monaghan, and as you can see, we have the records of 7 of the big 10 in Monaghan. So that's Shirley, Daughtry, Rossmore, Leslie, Blenny, Anhope, and Leonard Barnett. We also have a bit of material related to the Marquess of Bath as well. So don't just think of geographically in the terms of Ireland when you're looking at estate records, because we also have records in Cavan, and we also have records, certainly of the predominant landlords in Donegal, none more so than the Lord Donegal himself, and the Shaftesbury estate that inherited. We also have considerable landed records from elsewhere in Ireland. Do not ask why they are in PRONI. There are many reasons to explain that. We have the records of the Kenmare family, that's the Valentine Brown, that's the various Valentine Browns. One of the few landed families that remained Catholic during the period in County Kerry. Half of the archive is here, other half is based down in Killarney itself. Lisabel, that's the Gore Booth family of County Sligo. We have the full collection from Lisabel here as well. Probably better known for the most prominent member of the Gore Booth family is Constance Gore Booth, also known as Lady Constance Markowitz. Leicester papers from County Kildare as well, another prominent one. So we are more than just Northern Ireland records when it comes to estate records. I'm not going to sort of fill you in and give you a few tips on how to use estate records. And the first thing is you need to really know what estate your forebear lived on. So there's a few ways you can go about that. We're going to kick off with Griffiths. You were introduced to Griffiths last week and probably in previous weeks. They ask about Ireland's site. You can all get this for free at home. And I have done a search for a John Walls. John, and I haven't done it, but I am searching. Yeah, I'm searching in County Tyrone as well. We get 4 results for John Walls. Let's have a look them up, and this is a result. We have John Walls, and he's in the Marquis of Abercorn's estate. So we're underway. Okay, PRONI has a guide to landed estate records. This is organised. It's upstairs in the search room. It's not on the web. I'm not sure why it's not on the web, but we're going to ensure that it goes on the web. It's organised alphabetically and by county. So Antrim, Armagh, Down, Fermanagh, Derry, Tyrone. And it also has an index to land registry at the very back. Within the county, estate names are arranged alphabetically within the county with a description of the records and the relevant reference number. And that's just an example. So that's the De Salis estate, Tandergee. It's 3,663 acres. That's the valuation, 5k. And there's a brief description of what we have. And as you can see, they're across several collections. Well, some appear in D720, some appear in D763, some appear in D1253, and there are things like maps, surveys, lists of tenants, and we actually have a breakdown of which townlands: Braca, Unchinna, Ballylist, Ballynock, Cordrin, etc., etc. So very useful, very useful source to find who your landlord was. Okay, and that's sorry, that actually should have been back here. That was there's 2 images you can see when you look at the Ask of Ireland. You can actually see the details, and in this case you can actually see the actual Griffiths entry as well, so I've got that out of order. Okay, PRONI's revision books. The valuation records cover the period 1848 to 60s. They are then, the next survey is what's called a revaluation, and it takes place yearly. And so we're doing a look for Clandyboy, Clandyboy being the parish. sorry, yep, sorry, being the yep, place. And that's a result of all the Mandy Boy appearances. It's the actual top two, Bally Lady, that we're interested in. That's the front cover. That's the index page, and this is the entry that we're looking for, which is number 3A, and it's a it is a Henry McMaster, and we can see he's leasing off the Lord Dufferin. So again, we have found a landlord. PRONI also has a geographical index on its website if you don't know where townlands are. That is the map of the north of Ireland, and we then break it down into county by county. That's County Down, and if you scroll down, that's our Candy Boy, number 17. There. Okay. Also on the website, PRONI's website, is the PRONI electronic catalogue, and if you aren't sure about a collection, you can do a basic search. In this case, we're doing a search for Nugent papers, and that's the result. Nugent papers are D552, and that's the main entry. That's now that we've searched for it, you might want to have a look at how the class scheme looks. So you can also do a browse. Here's how the browse works. That's the browse page. We've already got the reference. It's D552. We input it into the search. We get a list of collections from D539 right through to D553, but it's D552 that we're interested in. And we cascade down the class scheme. So we have correspondence and related papers and papers that aren't correspondence. We're going to pick the papers that aren't correspondence. And we have title deeds and state papers, legal papers, household and pictorial material, family history. It's the estate papers we're looking for. And again, the estate papers are broken down into County Down, County Westmeath, and overall title deeds. Looking up the leases, that's a list of the leases. It's another way that we can drill through the PRONI e-catalogue. Okay, let's talk about what you can get in estate records. Kicking off with title deeds. Now, for the 17th century, most title deeds actually emanate from the Crown. In this case, it's a grant from James I to William Cole, dated 1711. This is just before the Charter is awarded to Enniskillen. And in this magnificent document, we have a grant of lands in Coole and Tircanada. Anybody from Enniskillen, by the way? Okay. Right, okay, then my mispronunciation of the townlands will not be appreciated. So it goes on to name the town, and this is fairly common within title deeds. It will name all the townlands that comprise an estate. So these are Tonnestrict, Carrigrad, Tate, Lavaux, Dromier, Gortinison, and on. Now, it also gives the conditions, which are to have 300 acres domain. Now, that's fairly standard for a big house estate, that the landlord will get 300 acres for themselves to form the domain, all in County Fermanagh, to hold forever, as of the Castle of Dublin, by fealty in common soakage, and he is awarded the power to create tenures, that's the tenants, and to hold a court, that's a manorial court, and there's a basic rent to James I. Most people don't get title deeds of this description, it has to be said. Most people get one of these. It's a lease, and leases are very underappreciated tool for when it comes to family history, because what a lease will provide is it will give the name of the tenant, which is good, but it will also give the name of what is described as 3 lives. And the reason what the 3 lives are is it's a duration for the length of the lease. So what an astute tenant will do will be to try and get 3 people who are going to live the longest. So they'll normally pick their 3 youngest children with the hope that they'll live to 70 or 80. So that lease will cover a 70 to 80 year period. Now, most people will tend to use their own children. Some don't. So some will use examples where they actually use the Crown's children or the Crown's grandchildren, so the lease lasts for the length of them. That's probably of less use for the family historian or the local historian, but certainly the grandchildren and the children, that's very helpful. Other information it will describe will be the actual acreage, the footfall for the tenancy, whether it's a shop or whether it's a piece of land to be farmed. The rent, not all rents are in money. Some of them will be by other types of goods, and often you will get a peppercorn rent as well. You'll also, within the lease, get witnesses as well, appearing, also usually members of the family. And on top of that, you will get it will also be stamped with the solicitors. So this example is a lease, it's dated 1755. It's a lease to James McConnell, Ballinbracket, for the life of James McConnell, who is the second son of the said James, and he's currently aged 21, so he's hoping he's going to live to 60. For the life of Thomas McConnell, that's his third son, and he's aged 10, and he's then gone for the fourth son as well. Notice he hasn't picked the first son. You know, he's gone for the 3 youngest sons. So the fourth son is James, and he's aged 6. Sometimes it's a bit easier to use our lease books. Lease books are a list of the leases that have been recorded, and they're useful because they record the dates when the leases begin, and they also occasionally have other occurrences. They may actually put in when the tenant dies or when the tenant leaves Ireland as well. So, and we've got an example, and this is for Brake in the manor of Richmond. And I know it's quite difficult to see, but you have the townland, you have the tenancy and the lives, the acres, roots and perches, and then the costs themselves. Rattles are probably what most people think of when they are going through estate records. It's probably the first port of call they make. Reason being because the rentals will list tenants, they'll list them by townland, within a townland, and they again will record the acreage of the holdings, and sometimes even arrears as well may appear in rentals, not always. It'll certainly give how much they pay included. I've got an example of another rental. This is of an estate of Francis Lord Conway. It describes in the Kingdom of Ireland for the year ending All Saints 1720. And again, it's a list of names, the acres, the rent, and I can't make out the last column. Another type of rental is a bog rental. Bogs in Ireland have a special importance, mainly down to peat. So again, It's land which may not have been regarded as valuable. It's not valuable for farming or for growing or for livestock, but it is value for the peat. So we do have specific rentals related to things like bogs. Rentals aren't the only useful estate record for genealogical purposes. We also have wage and account books, and we will also have maps. And these all contain names of tenants occupying land on an estate and of people working on or connected with the estate in some way. This is a Workmans Account. It's dated the 17th of February 1835, and what wage books normally do is they record the name of the estate labourer, household servants, gardeners, some of whom may not appear as tenants when you go into the actual rentals, so that they do serve a separate purpose when it comes to genealogy. Maybe these people you may not be able to find any other way. So in this example, you can see the top line is a Robert Wilton, and he's either cleaning or clearing quarry. We weren't able to actually make this word out, but I think it's clearing quarry itself. When we looking at another example of a workman's account book, this is 1810, and along the top we have the names of, so we have the workmen's names. You also notice it's all broken down to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, so we actually have an account of what work is being done on a daily basis. So the individuals that are named there, they turn out to be overseers, others work in stables, and then towards the bottom we've got people who are just picking potatoes as well. This is pre the potato famine, I should point out. The next one. Sorry?
No Friday.
Sorry?
No Friday.
No, I don't think that's I think that's the way the photograph is taken.
All right, just rather than up to Thursday.
Rather than the fact that there's no work done on a Friday. That's more to fit the screen. Okay, we mentioned Kenmare Estate earlier. That's another example, a slightly different example. This is of a workman getting paid. So the person's name is Patrick Dunn. It covers the period 1782 through to, I think it's 1791. And we see how he's paid. So paid by my lord, paid you this day. So we have a record of just how much money a workman on an estate was getting. Ejectment books. Some landlords ejected people. Certainly in the mid-19th century, there was a spate of ejectments. So this is another way to get lists of names which you may not have thought of. So again, let's see, here we go. John Abram, Ballymurray, carried for, and okay, he's £1, sorry, £5, 6 shillings, 8 pence, and it's been carried forward, so he's been ejected. So we have a list of people who've been turfed out of their property. Ejectment was tended not to be done lightly. You know, it caused great stigma to the people who were there, and it tended to be quite a brutish operation, with bailiffs turning up and onlookers, as you know, as a family were actually, and quite often was a whole family, not just an individual, were asked to leave the house. And so a lot of landlords certainly went out of their way to try and avoid this, and even during the bad years as well. Maps. Maps are a superb way of tying individuals to actual plots. So this is a map of the Moira Estate, 1782. It's covers the place is called Eden Darve, and there are annotations that accompany this. So we have here, these are the mearings, this is where it joins, and these are the Boggs. So we get into a lot more detail. Even better, this is 1903 map of the Downshire estates. We actually have a key which references these numbers to these people, and acres, perches, roots. So we actually have a record of where they are on the land. Now, not all estate collections have maps of that quality, but plenty do. Here's a map of Larne, dated 1815. Not in the greatest of order, but we have the properties, and we have a key, and that's the key blown up. So James Templeton, John McCulloch, they're 1 and 2. If we go back, one and two are there somewhere. But you get the drift. Okay, pedigrees. Some people have actually done the work for you. This is from the Enniskillen papers, the Cole family. This is PRONI's biggest document. On the left, this is actually 30 foot long. This is so long we can't display it. And actually, the Enniskillen Museum asked to borrow it. We could not get it out from PRONI, so we made a digitized version of it. But they themselves were not able to display in its 30 foot greatness. So they've just rolled it up at the bottom and just displayed the top 6 feet as well. So I think that goes back to the time of Christ and before that pedigree. But within most big estate collections, you will actually find substantial pedigrees themselves. Muster rolls. Militia, yeomanry, and muster records are often littered amongst the land of the state archives, and they consist of lists of men liable for service in local defence forces, which basically means to be liable, you basically have a weapon of some description. So this is a manuscript copy of a muster roll for County Londonderry and Donegal. It's compiled by Reverend D. Stewart, and the list names 599 men entitled to bear arms in the cities and liberties of Londonderry/Derry. And some of the names are Baird Hamilton, he has a sword and a musket. Henry Osborne, he's got a sword and a pike. And then the document on the right lists key people with armed men. So Robert McClelland, who's described as a chief tenant, has 127 men. The next name down, we're looking at this document. I know you cannot read it from the back. The second line says Company of Clothmakers, and they have 65 men. The next name down is a Mr. Harrington. He's an undertaker. He seems to have more men than anybody else. Well, he seems to have more land than anybody else. He's got 3,000 acres, and he's also got 57 men entitled to bear weapons. You can also get tidbits out of correspondence. This is rather bizarre reference in one of the papers where it says James Vaughan's tenure in Drumgoon extended no further than his own life, and I think his wife's. That's dated 1767. We also have petitions from tenants. There's many reasons. These are just some examples of petitions. The petitions can be the rent's too high, or in this case, assistance to emigrate, and probably the most common one is charity actually as well. So this is a petition to emigrate to America, and what you get at the end of a petition is you'll get about 30 names of the local people, which is why it's very useful for a genealogical tool. For a local history tool, it's of interest in its own sake. In this case, your petitioner is a poor, honest man, so it's holding a small farm of 5 acres, and who by his industry supported a large family of 11, and now having his 2 eldest daughters of age, is unable to provide for them at home, or now to pay their passage to America, implores assistance to provide for their emigration to America. So he's shipping his daughters off to the US today, because he can't feed them. He obviously can't marry them off. The second petition is from a James Finnigan, and he writes, is as great an object of charity as any person on Shirley's estate. Is lying sick these 3 days. He has neither day cloths nor night cloths. If your honour would be so kind as to give him a blanket, it might be a means of restoring him to his poor family. Shirley estate is a Monaghan estate. Shirley employed a number of agents who were even less popular than George Osborne, and were regularly complained about. And even today, 300 years later, the agents are still held in equally low esteem and blamed for most of the inequities of the 18th and 19th century. Speaking about emigration, we don't have a lot of emigration lists, but some of the emigration lists that we do have turn up in estate papers. And this is an estate list showing townlands, the emigrants, and even better, the ages of immigrants: 27, 25, 19, 13, 16, 15, 11, 9, 3, 1. And then again, it's Shirley estate, he's shipping them out, or his agent is shipping them out. This is the Townland of Doak, 1847. We're approaching famine period. And that's a list of, again, people from the Townland of Doak, their names, and again, the age: 52, 40, 17, 15, 11, 9, 7, 5. That's a whole family being shipped out. Again, you get lists of the freeholders, people who from the freehold turn up in the estate records, and this is useful because it's a whole record. It's the name, its address, it's the landlord, it's the value. There's a description of the property, the location, the lives, the 3 lives we talked about earlier, and the date when registered as well. Rent arrears. As I said, a lot of landlords don't really want to go out of their way to eject the tenants, but many of the tenants do live in arrears, and certainly in the 19th century, that's very common. Certainly once during the famine years, people aren't able to pay their arrears, and that remains outstanding. And again, after the famine years, the problem for a lot of landlords is that the value of the property is starting to drop, yet the rent's still quite high, and that will go on to cause problems amongst the tenantry towards the end of the century. Surveys. Surveys were very important, certainly at the start of the 17th century, as landlords needed to establish the boundaries of their estate. Now, this is a massive survey, probably one of the most famous surveyors of the Ulster Plantation, a guy called Raven. There's 2 big sets of Raven maps. One set is held in Bangor, the other set we have a copy of here, and that's for the county of Derry. Pictorially, it's magnificent. I actually have a copy of one of them on my wall of Derry itself. This one is of Magherafelt. Now, what Thomas Raven did was he was a cartographer by trade, so he wasn't just doing a map, but he was surveying what were the types of buildings that were erected in the various county dairy towns, and that's very much because the Ulster plan actually had dictated the types of towns that were meant to be built and what buildings ought to go into it. Another aspect of the emanating from the plantation was that the landlords were given the rights to hold manor courts. Here we have an example of a Gideon Moor versus an Alexander Mulvena. An easier one to read is the following list, and that's a list of jury members as well. So we're not just looking at names of plaintiffs and defendants, but members of the jury as well, which is another useful substitute, and that's for the Brownlow estate outside Lurgan, and it covers the period 1776 to 1832. We mentioned solicitors earlier. PRONI has a number of big solicitor connections. The Strange and Brett, which is a massive Belfast solicitor, probably more important for the clients had than the actual practice itself. The Strange and Brett looked after what was the Shaftesbury estate, which were originally, they inherited the old Donegal estate, which were the Chichesters. Chichester was the main architect of the Ulster plantation, and made sure he got himself the best possible lands he could, so he took Belfast and Carrickfergus. Other prominent ones are Carlton, Atkinson and Stone is a Portadown one, and Wilson and Sims is Strabane, O'Rourke, McDonald, Tweed, they're Antrim. And what you get in the solicitors' records are similar to what appears in the estate records. It's the other half. So we've got mortgages and leases, conveyances and indentures, charters and patents, marriage settlements. We've talked about all of these. Writs and wills, and case files themselves. I don't actually have a slide for wills, but I should reference this as well. PRONI's civic registration only starts in the mid-19th century. For pre-1858 wills, these tend to turn up in private collections, scattered amongst many of PRONI's many archives. And so you see a lot of wills turning up in big estate collections, and in fact small estate collections. And they're not just the wills of the estate family. They'll include people that have married into the family, and they will have brought wills themselves from their families. And we also even get some very eccentric ones, which you can't even just place why there's a copy of a will in the connection, and maybe it's part of the agent or one of his family, and that's been added as well. It's impossible to know. The 19th century saw a lot of estates get financially into diffs. They ended up in a queer street. So we had a number of acts to alleviate this. The Encumbered Estates Acts were in 1848 and 1849. They allowed the sale of Irish estates that had been mortgaged and whose owners, because of the famine, well, in particular the Great Famine, were unable to meet their obligations, were able to sell it. And these were sold in lots. So this is a Coleraine one. It's in Bog Hill, Coleraine, and Mary Lycan is the widow. And we have a description of the tenancy as well, and associated lands. Okay, land registry. I said have a wee word about land registry. PRONI has a massive collection called LR1, which contains an estimated 50,000 items. It's one of our largest collections in PRONI. And it relates to the changes in the ownership and occupancy of land in Ireland brought about by several land acts, namely these land acts, which were passed from the Landlord and Tenant Act 1870 right through to the Northern Ireland Act 1925, and then the Northern Ireland Land Purchase Winding Up Act of 1935. And the LR1 archive is a result of all these acts, and includes within each, it's broken down by individual, and each individual will have the title, a schedule of encumbrances, applications for sale, agreements for sale, estate maps, inspectors' reports, title deeds, and these is testamentary papers, and they're all indexed by name. And we have some reports as well. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I think the only thing I want to reference is we do have a registry of deeds for Dublin as well, copies of that which are in MIC 7 and MIC 311. I'm going to finish on that point, and